So for the Resurrection of Gavin Stone, the budget was low. It was a $1.5 million production budget, which is super low. So you'd think that the chances of making your money back are good. Well, then they spent $6 or $7 million on marketing. So then when the opening weekend comes and it did, I think the opening weekend number was like 1.4, 1.5 million. Well, that's only half of that is going to go to the studio. The second weekend it drops even more, and so the final box office total was $2.3 million for Resurrection of Gavin Stone. And so when they've spent $8-9 million and they only get half of the box office, and then that means that the DVD sales and the streaming numbers are going to be low as well. So the number for opening weekend was lower than their lowest projection. And so within just a couple hours, we knew on Friday afternoon that it was going to be a bomb. And so I'm at my low point with my wife at home alone going, God had done so many things to get us to this point. Like, it was so clear. And I knew God had called me to this. Well, he's not the author of failure. So this failure means maybe it wasn't God. Maybe I had misread the tea leaves. Maybe I had misheard what I thought was my calling, but was actually just maybe my own flesh and my own desires. And God put it on my wife's heart very explicitly, very clearly, not an audible voice, but almost as though it was one. Read the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And so together we opened up our Bibles and we read that story, and we noticed something that we hadn't really maybe made sense of in the past, even though we'd heard the story 100 times, which is that when the disciples came to Jesus and said, the people are hungry, the thousands of people that you're talking to, they're starving. We need to send them home. And Jesus says, oh, we can't send them home. They're so hungry, they'll faint along the way. So what does that tell you? It means he knew that they were hungry and desperate. And when you think about it, it was his fault. He's the one who'd been talking for 3 days. He brought them to that place of hunger and desperation. He's not dumb. He's the God of the universe. He's preaching to them. He knows exactly how hungry they're getting, and he keeps talking. So he brings them to that place of desperation where the only solution for it is a miracle. And so when you realize, okay, not only does God sometimes allow our hunger or our desperation, and yes, sometimes our suffering, and many times he's responsible for it. Now, again, I don't believe that God, sets out to create bad things to happen to people, obviously. But many times he allows it or might even steer us towards it because he has something important for us to learn. And in this case, it was very clear that we were thinking, all right, God has brought us here to this place of hunger and desperation. That doesn't mean he's absent, the fact that we've failed. And so that night, we thought maybe that meant the numbers were going to magically turn around and God was going to feed the 5,000 and multiply our these really small loaves and fish. That didn't happen. And so we were wondering, why did God put us in this story? What are we supposed to learn? All right, we've got the point that he's in this, or that at least we don't know that he's not, meaning he could be responsible for this hunger that we're in. Well, that night at 4 a.m, I'm writing a big 15-page memo outlining everything that went wrong and how I can learn from this. And I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to make sure this never happens again. I'm a problem solver. I'm a doer. I'm an accomplisher. And I'm working on this, and bing, pops up on my computer a Facebook message from someone I've never met. And he doesn't say hi, doesn't say hello, just says, remember, your job is not to feed the 5,000. It's only to provide the loaves and fish. And I'm like, was my computer recording what my wife and I talked about today? Like, who did I tell? Like, how does he know that I'm trying to figure out what the loaves and fish story means in my life? And so I just responded with, what are you doing up at 4 a.m? And he said, well, I'm in Romania right now. I'm on a different time zone. And I heard about your movie. And so I just wanted to say that. And I said, can I just ask why you said that to me? And he goes, oh, that wasn't me. God told me to tell you that. And he had a similar experience to my wife, where God had just put it on his heart. Tell Dallas it's not his job to feed the 5,000, right? And he didn't want to, because he's like, that's a condescending thing to say to someone I barely know. I've only talked to them on Facebook a couple of times. And God just put it on his heart. So he sent it to me, and it changed my life. Because for the first time in my life, I truly grasped the notion that my job and our job is to make the best 5 loaves and 2 fish that we can, to bring it to God. And if he deems it worthy of acceptance, the transaction's over. Whether or not he feeds 5,000 with it is up to him and not us. And when you get to that point in your life where you can truly be okay with that, whatever your loaves and fish are going to be, you're okay with it. If he doesn't, whatever the results are, you don't take responsibility for, if you're in his will. That was a life-changing knowledge for me, and it becomes a superpower because you stop caring what other people think. It leads you to make crazy decisions like crowdfunding a TV show about Jesus, and knowing that it probably won't work, and then it exceeds your expectations. And based on a short film I did for my church's Christmas Eve service about the birth of Christ from the perspective of the shepherds. I mean, all these things that have led to this conversation were preceded by brokenness and surrender and humility. And I hope that if you and I talk in 5-7 years about other Bible projects that I'm doing or whatever, that message never changes and that my posture never changes.
I'm curious in what you're describing about the creation of the resurrection of Gavin Stone, and then that rock bottom kind of experience you had before creating The Chosen, which has just been this global phenomenon. If you felt called by God specifically to do the resurrection, and that was part of the confusion for you, like, why isn't this more successful? But God was teaching you to be faithful, even if this thing that he wants you to do reaches maybe one person. I mean, it reached a lot more than one person,
Sure.
Obviously. Was that the lesson for you?
Well, absolutely, because when the movie failed, I assumed then, well, I guess I was wrong. He didn't call me to this. But I then had to reflect back on all the things that had happened that were so clearly God-driven. Doors that had closed at the right time, windows that had opened at the right time. The fact that I couldn't get that story out of my mind when I first heard it, The Resurrection of Gavin Stone. The fact that it really did feel while I was doing it like I was in my wheelhouse. I'm very proud of the message of the film, and I'm proud of the film. I mean, the film, I'm proud to have made it, and a lot of people have been impacted by it, and I think it's a decent film. And yet the results shouldn't impact whether or not you truly felt called to something. So there are multiple things that can be evidence of whether you were called or whether it was just a dream you had because you wanted to do something. Time oftentimes is one of the factors. If God just doesn't let it, like when you're taking a shower, when you're on a walk, it just keeps coming to you and you keep feeling this depth of meaning about it. That's one sign. A mentor in your life that you can maybe go to and say, this is what I'm feeling. What do you think? Sometimes God can give them wisdom. Of course, God's word is above all. But God's word doesn't always speak to specifically Dallas Jenkins 2020, or whatever year I'm dealing with something. So sometimes you have to find in God's word what the general principle is that applies to your situation and draw from that. Prayer, obviously, but even sometimes in prayer, you go, if you're a human being and you're like, all right, I feel like God's giving me something, but I don't know if it's God or me. And I'm sure we've been wrong at times. I'm sure we have thought something was from God, but really it was our flesh. That's the faith life. That's the journey. That's wrestling with principalities and powers of this world, right? And so ultimately, what you have to realize is that the positive or negative results of the initiative are not the gauge as to whether or not God called you to it, because God may sometimes call you to something that isn't about the success of the results of, by the world's definition, but it's something he had specifically for you. And so we sometimes measure our relationship with God, our ministry, our job, whatever, by the numbers, by the success. I'm sure you have a team of people who are analyzing the number of downloads of each podcast episode, and it's hard for you to kind of remember, I'm not doing this for the numbers. And it's hard to remember that when you have a job. It's your full-time job and you have a staff, and success in the world is measured by those numbers. But when you can get to that place where you just are focused on that North Star of, I'm pleasing God, I want to be in his will, I want to give to the world what he's given to me, and I can be okay with whatever the result is. It really can be life-changing.